welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we've got a really fascinating and I think a pretty urgent mission. We're going to take a stack of dense historical analysis and try to find the shared gravitational pull that caused three of the world's most significant national collapses.
Right.
We're talking about constitutional failure, and our sources explicitly connect three episodes separated by, centuries and continents.
And we are really diving into a comparative study of crisis here. Our sources link the foundational political fracture of early Islamic history, the whole confrontation between Caliph Ali and Muawiya with the constitutional breakdown that, of course, triggered the American Civil War.
And then brings it right into the modern era.
And then all the way to the modern national tragedy that saw Pakistan split in 1971, which, led to the creation of Bangladesh.
The scale is just immense, but the core theme is very tightly focused. It's all about this question: how do political disagreements, which are normal, even healthy in any state, how do they suddenly metastasize into crises so profound that they just shatter the constitutional order entirely?
We're really looking for that universal pathogen. What is it that transforms basic political tension into outright schism?
Exactly.
Yeah, and these were not, mere squabbles over tax policy or border lines. In all three of these instances, the central disagreement revolved around the very structure of authority.
The definition of legitimacy.
The definition of legitimacy, the timing of justice, it's fundamental stuff. When the basic rules of governance cease to be agreed upon, the state just loses its ability to function. It doesn't matter if it's a caliphate, a republic, or a parliamentary democracy.
And the price of this failure is just catastrophic. It's measured in civil war, in death, and in permanent national division. We are using these three massive historical data points to test frankly, a chilling hypothesis.
Which is?
That contested authority makes unity impossible unless the institutions for resolution are trusted and, crucially, binding.
And that element of trust is absolutely key. When high-stakes political actors reject the lawful forum, and that could be a council, a court, an election result, the subsequent violence is just the inevitable sort of physical manifestation of that underlying legal failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. If unity requires unchallenged authority, what happens when that authority is immediately questioned right from day one?
Yeah.
Let's begin with the first case our sources analyze, what they call the first constitutional schism in Muslim history, the confrontation following the tragic assassination of the third Caliph, Uthman, and the subsequent challenge to Caliph Ali ibn Abi Talib.
The context here is just absolute political trauma. You have to picture it. The assassination of Uthman, peace be upon him, in 656 CE wasn't just regicide.
No.
It was a profound blow to the legal and moral authority of this nascent Islamic state. It instantly created a power vacuum and critically demanded immediate accountability.
A need for justice.
A need for justice that Ali was forced to inherit the moment he accepted the caliphate. It was, a poisoned chalice in some ways.
So, Ali, peace be upon him, he was pledged allegiance by the vast majority of those present in Medina, which was the recognized capital.
Right.
So by the established norms of succession at the time, he possessed let's call it the constitutional legitimacy of the office. His position structurally should have been secure.
It absolutely should have, but that legitimacy was immediately conditionalized by a very powerful regional figure, Muawiya, peace be upon him.
The governor of Syria.
The long-serving and highly successful governor of Syria. And Muawiya leveraged his powerful regional base and his familial ties to the assassinated Caliph Uthman to refuse allegiance. And this wasn't just a meek dissent.
No, this was a line in the sand.
It was a calculated institutional rejection, a direct challenge.
And this is where the nuance is so essential, because our analysis confirms this wasn't just, a personal spat over who got the top job.
Not at all.
It was a constitutional standoff. It was about sequencing and jurisdiction. Muawiya's demand was concrete, and it was legally weighty. He basically said, I will pledge allegiance, but only after Uthman's murderers are brought to swift and certain justice.
Just think about the implications of that. Ali, as the central authority, he was arguing for stability first. His position was, look, I need a unified state, secure in its command, to be able to conduct a proper investigation and trials.
You can't have justice in chaos.
Exactly. But Muawiya, the regional challenger, insisted on justice first. He's saying, until you prove the state can enforce accountability and punish the perpetrators, your authority is compromised and, to me, illegitimate.
And neither side could structurally concede, could they? If Ali gives in, he's admitting his authority is conditional. If Muawiya gives in, he's abandoning his claim for justice.
Precisely. Neither side could back down without compromising their foundational principle.
So that structural inability to yield without a total collapse, that's what generated these 4 central, unresolved constitutional questions that ultimately spiraled the community into years of devastating civil conflict. Let's spend some real time on these, because they really do represent the blueprint for constitutional schism.
They absolutely do. So the first question was jurisdictional, pure and simple. Who held the authority to enforce justice after a ruler's assassination?
Right. Was it the new caliph?
Was this an exclusive right of the caliph operating centrally from Medina? Or could powerful regional governors like Muawiya use this claim for justice to leverage power and demand terms?
Which would effectively decentralize the whole state's judicial authority.
It would shatter it. I mean, if the governors could dictate terms on something this fundamental, the caliphate was already broken. It was a confederation, not a unified state.
And that leads directly to the second question, which is more pragmatic. It's about sequencing.
Yes.
Should political stability be prioritized before criminal accountability?
And what a dilemma that is. If Ali had immediately launched this massive, potentially destabilizing search for the murderers among, various powerful tribes and factions.
He risked fragmenting his own new administration.
Totally. But by delaying the prosecutions, he risked appearing weak or, even worse, complicit in the eyes of powerful figures like Muawiya and his supporters.
So it was a no-win scenario without some kind of, a supreme constitutional arbiter that everyone agreed on.
Which didn't exist. There was no Supreme Court.
Right. And this crisis really defined the relationship between the center and the regions forever. The third question, did a powerful governor possess the right to unilaterally challenge and refuse to acknowledge the legitimate central head of state?
It's the core question. If the answer is yes, then the Islamic Empire was fundamentally a loose confederation of autonomous provinces, not a unified state under a single authority.
But if the answer is no?
If the answer is no, then the demands for justice, however legitimate they might be, could be permanently silenced by central power. It's a question of tyranny versus anarchy, in a way.
And the final question, this one hits at the very core of legitimacy itself. Should allegiance precede or follow judicial settlement?
It's such a subtle but powerful point.
It is. If allegiance is mandatory and unconditional the moment a caliph is chosen, then the system preserves unity, at least on the surface.
Right, the state holds together.
But if allegiance is conditional on performance, on delivering a specific judicial outcome like punishing murderers, then every subsequent caliph would be placed on probation by regional powers.
Massively weakening the central office. The caliph would become a manager, not a leader, constantly trying to appease provincial governors.
So the fact that no trusted pre-existing legal or consultative council, what our sources call a lawful forum, that both the center and the regions would accept as binding, could definitively answer these 4 questions.
That was a failure.
That meant the disagreement moved from the political arena, from debate to the military one.
The consequences were immediate and swift. We saw this rapid division of provinces, with governors declaring for one side or the other. We saw separate military mobilizations, massive armies being raised.
And widespread public polarization, right? People having to choose sides.
Exactly. The center could no longer guarantee order, and this fragmentation led directly to the massive confrontation at the Battle of Siffin.
It's so crucial to understand why Siffin was such a turning point. You have these 2 massive armies, both Muslim, facing potential mutual annihilation.
The sources describe it as a moment of profound horror for the community.
And out of that horror, they agreed to halt the bloodshed and submit the dispute to a process of arbitration, or tahkim. This was an attempt to find that lawful forum, born out of pure necessity.
A desperate attempt to step back from the brink. They chose 2 highly respected arbitrators, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari for Ali's side and Amr ibn al as for Muawiya's side.
And the goal was simple. On the surface, at least, peacefully resolve the dispute over the leadership of the community and the sequencing of justice.
But here is the catastrophic constitutional failure of tahkim that the sources just stress over and over again.
What happened?
The process itself was immediately rejected by a powerful segment of Ali's own supporters, the faction that became known to history as the Khawari or the seceders.
Wait, hold on. Why did they reject a process that was specifically intended to stop the bloodshed? That seems counterintuitive.
Because they rejected it on the grounds of, well, theological and constitutional principle. They argued that Ali, as the legitimately pledged caliph, should never have submitted his divine right to rule his legitimate authority to human arbitration.
So for them, it was a compromise too far.
It was more than that. They saw Takim not as a lawful solution, but as an act of apostasy, or, at the very least, a fundamental constitutional surrender. They believed judgment belongs to God alone, and Ali had wrongly ceded that to men.
That is profound. So the attempt at a lawful resolution didn't heal the schism at all. It actually created an entirely new, deeply hostile constitutional faction that challenged Ali's legitimacy even more fiercely than Muawiya did.
It was a constitutional trap, a complete disaster. The arbitration itself failed to bridge the gap between Ali and Muawiya in the end.
And at the same time,
And simultaneously, it weakened Ali's government irreparably by creating this violent, radical internal opposition.
so this historical episode, it sets the first great template for schism. Even if you try to find a lawful forum, if that underlying institutional trust is missing, the attempt at resolution will only create new, more radical points of political fracture.
That's it, exactly. What a potent, tragic precedent.
Yeah. This was a clash between institutional legitimacy, political reality, and the demanding pace of justice. And the failure to resolve it meant this fragility was, hardwired into the subsequent political DNA of the entire region.
It absolutely was. It established a dangerous historical model that constitutional authority, even when it's derived from an established consensus, can be perpetually challenged and even rejected by powerful regional actors who are demanding specific outcomes.
That brings us so smoothly to the next major case our sources analyze. We're jumping forward 12 centuries across a vast ocean to the parallel of federalism found in the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865.
Right.
The U.S. was a constitutional republic founded on written law, checks and balances, a Supreme Court, yet it experienced the exact same systemic failure.
The context is obviously different. It's about the tension between state sovereignty and federal power, and it's all exacerbated by the moral and economic catastrophe of slavery.
But structurally, the fracture point is identical.
Identical. The rejection of central federal authority when southern states declared independence and formed a competing government, the Confederacy.
And just as Muawiya's challenge to Ali centered on those 4 constitutional questions we just discussed, the U.S. crisis hinged on structural ambiguities in its own founding document.
That's a great point. The argument wasn't just about slavery as a moral issue. It was about the legal mechanism by which slavery could be protected or prohibited. It was a disagreement over who had the final say.
Exactly. So the American crisis, it raised 3 critical constitutional questions that directly mirror the challenges faced by the early caliphate. The first and the most immediate was, can a state unilaterally secede from the Union?
And the U.S. Constitution was famously, or maybe infamously, vague on this point.
Right, so you had proponents of secession arguing that the Union was merely a compact, a contract between sovereign states.
And like any contract, it could be broken.
Exactly, meaning they retained the power to withdraw if they felt the federal government had violated that compact. It's a very sophisticated regional challenge to the center.
And on the other side, you had the federal position, championed, of course, by President Abraham Lincoln. His view was that the Union was perpetual, established not by a compact between states, but by the will of the American people as a whole.
So in his view, secession was legally void.
Legally void. It was an act of rebellion, not a legitimate constitutional withdrawal. The clash was over the very nature of the Union's existence, its permanence.
And this feeds directly into the second question, which feels so familiar after our last discussion. Is the central government supreme over regional authority?
It's the Ali versus Muawiya tension repeated, but with different titles. If the states were supreme, then federal laws, particularly those that might restrict the expansion of slavery, could simply be ignored or nullified, as they called it.
But if the federal government was supreme,
Then the states had to comply, period. Lincoln insisted on federal supremacy, viewing the states not as separate sovereigns, but as administrative components of a larger, unified political entity.
that was the only way, in his view, the republic could endure.
Absolutely. He believed that if 11 states could simply walk away because they disliked an election result or a policy direction, then the entire federal system was a sham. The whole project was a failure.
And like the crisis centuries before, this third question emerged. Who defines legitimacy in a divided nation? Is it the legitimacy derived from state majorities and the specific constitutional interpretation favored by the South?
Sure.
Or is it the legitimacy derived from the overarching federal constitutional document enforced by a nationally elected president? Two competing sources of legitimacy.
And Lincoln addressed this head-on in his first inaugural address. He stated unequivocally that the Union was indestructible. But the most quoted line from our sources, "A nation cannot endure permanently half slave and half free," speaks directly to this.
We often interpret that line morally, which it is, of course.
Of course.
But as our sources show, the constitutional meaning is paramount. He's saying you cannot have two completely different legal and social systems coexisting under one constitutional umbrella.
The inherent contradiction was just too great. Free labor versus slave labor, state sovereignty versus federal supremacy. It was too volatile to be contained by political compromise any longer.
And so the attempt to find a lawful forum, it failed completely.
Totally. All the last-minute compromises they attempted in Congress, things like the Crittenden Compromise,
They were all rejected.
all rejected, because neither side was willing to concede on the core constitutional principle of slavery's future. The process of political resolution just collapsed into itself.
And the cost of that constitutional collapse was just staggering. We need to remember the sheer scale of this failure. The sources remind us that 750,000 deaths resulted from this conflict.
It's a number that's almost impossible to comprehend.
It's more American fatalities than in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and all other U.S. conflicts combined. That is the true price of allowing a political dispute to morph into a constitutional schism.
And beyond the horrific human tragedy, the outcome irrevocably settled the debate on federal supremacy. It established that the Union was perpetual and secession was constitutionally impossible. This violence fundamentally redefined the relationship between Washington, D.C. and the states.
And it led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
A complete reset of the constitutional framework concerning civil rights and citizenship.
The parallel is just stunning when you lay it out like that. In both the 7th century Caliphate and the 19th century Republic, fragmentation challenged the core definition of constitutional authority.
Whether it was the caliph's legitimacy or federal supremacy.
And the failure to resolve that challenge peacefully resulted in massive, deadly conflict.
And in both instances, the conflict was not resolved by diplomacy or arbitration or compromise, but by force of arms. It proved that once the consensus on the rules is broken, there is no stepping back to a legal forum. The only forum left is the battlefield.
Which brings us to our third case, the modern manifestation of this recurring pattern. Pakistan's secession of East Pakistan in 1971, which of course created Bangladesh. Here we transition into a modern nation attempting to operate a complex, multi-ethnic parliamentary democracy.
And this tragedy is a perfect demonstration that neither ancient tradition nor modern constitutional design is immune to this specific type of failure. Pakistan, a state established on democratic principles, faced its deepest disaster when institutional power rejected a clear democratic mandate.
Igniting regional grievances that had been simmering for decades.
For decades.
So let's detail the triggers, because they really show the slow burn that led to this rapid explosion. Long before 1971, you had East and West Pakistan separated by 1,000 miles of hostile Indian territory.
Geographically, it was an almost impossible state to govern.
It was. And they were held together primarily by religion, but they were deeply fractured by language Urdu dominance in the West versus Bengali in the East, and deep systemic economic disparity.
East Pakistan consistently felt economically exploited and politically marginalized by the West Pakistani-dominated establishment.
So that existing tension just boiled over after the 1970 general election, an election that was designed to transfer power back to civilian rule after a period of military dictatorship.
Right, this was supposed to be the Great Democratic Reset.
And Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League, which was based almost entirely in East Pakistan, won a landslide majority of seats in the National Assembly. A clear, undeniable democratic mandate to form the central government.
An absolute majority, not a plurality. They had the numbers to rule outright.
And the constitutional breach was instantaneous and devastating. The central power structure, dominated by the West Pakistani military and political establishment, refused to convene the assembly.
And refused to transfer power to the majority party.
This rejection just negated the legitimacy of the entire democratic process they had just overseen.
I mean, when you hold a massive election and the outcome is simply ignored, you destroy the most fundamental lawful forum a modern state possesses.
So this failure to transfer power meant those pre-existing provincial grievances.
They instantly transformed from political complaints into a constitutional demand for autonomy or, ultimately, separation.
And we saw the political disagreement militarized almost immediately. Negotiations collapsed, and the central government chose military force Operation Searchlight to crush the political opposition in the East.
They chose violence rather than accepting the electoral outcome.
And just as in the crises of Ali and Lincoln, this generated a new set of constitutional questions that echo those historical precedents. The first one was, who holds true political legitimacy?
Is it the popular, undeniable electoral mandate won by the Awami League?
Or is it the entrenched central power structure that physically controls the capital, the bureaucracy, and most importantly, the military? Mandate versus might.
And the second question directly mirrored the tension of federal versus regional power we saw in America. Can central authority, despite its physical control, simply ignore a majority mandate that's derived from a geographically distinct region?
It challenges the very concept of a unified representative government.
It does. And the most tragic question, mirroring the American crisis of secession, does a province, after being disenfranchised and subjected to military force, have the right to self-determination and exit the Union?
And the answer, tragically, was yes, but only through immense bloodshed.
An incredible amount of bloodshed.
This final point is so crucial, and it echoes that sequencing question posed to Caliph Ali. Does delay in justice cause rebellion?
In this case, the justice wasn't about a murder trial.
No, the justice was the timely recognition of political rights and the transfer of power. And the delay, or outright denial, in granting that constitutional justice resulted in full-scale civil war, foreign intervention from India, and the irreversible national breakup.
The outcome was the worst national tragedy in Pakistan's history. It cost, by some estimates, millions of lives and shattered the founding unity of the state.
And it proved that in the modern democratic context, just as in the historical caliphate, when political disagreements shift to constitutional repudiation, the result is war and secession.
This universal conclusion is just startling in its consistency across time and culture.
It really is. When political disputes become disputes over the fundamental rules, who is legitimate, who has the right to rule, and how is justice delivered, the nation breaks. It is that shift from arguing within the Constitution to arguing against the Constitution that marks the point of no return.
The Constitution ceases to be the infrastructure of peace at that point. It becomes merely a piece of paper, irrelevant to the powerful actors who are now deciding the fate of the nation through military mobilization.
Okay, let's structure the final frick of our deep dive now. Let's bring that analytical table from the source material to life. We need to move beyond just listing the facts and really synthesize the universal truth that ties a 7th century conflict to a 20th century disaster.
I think we can connect the dots by analyzing the functional parallels across those 4 criteria we've been touching on. The nature of the dispute, the source of the challenge, the failure of resolution, and of course, the ultimate outcome.
Because this synthesis is what reveals the hidden, consistent laws of constitutional collapse.
Exactly.
So let's start with the nature of the dispute. What fundamental political value was being contested in each case? For the early Islamic crisis, the fight was fundamentally over legitimacy and justice.
Right. Who rules and how is accountability handled after a major political crime? It was about first principles of the state.
Okay, then in the American Civil War, the dispute was purely structural. Federal versus state authority.
Where does ultimate power reside? Is the nation top-down or bottom-up? It was a very dry but incredibly violent legal fight over jurisdictional hierarchy.
And then in Pakistan, 1971, the dispute was over the electoral mandate and autonomy. The core question was whether democratic mechanisms would actually be honored.
Or whether centralized, non-elected power would just override the popular will of a region. It was a test of democracy, and democracy failed.
Okay, so now let's look at the source of the challenge. Who had the leverage to defy the center in each case? In the Islamic crisis, it was these powerful, organized governors like Muawiya who were commanding significant regional armies and resources.
They had real power. In the U.S. Civil War, the challenge came from the states themselves, asserting their claimed sovereign right to exit the Union as political entities.
And in Pakistan.
In Pakistan, the challenge came from the Eastern Province, which possessed a demographic majority but felt politically powerless. They leveraged their democratic mandate to reject West Pakistani control.
So the pattern holds. The challenge always originates from a powerful, non-centralized regional entity that refuses to submit to the central authority's claims.
Oh, always. Now, the third point. The failure of resolution. I think this reveals the fragility of political institutions when the stakes become existential.
Right. In the Islamic crisis, the failure was that diplomatic and judicial attempt at arbitration, the Takim.
Which, as we discussed, was rejected by key factions and only made the schism worse.
Then in the American case, the political system failed because the peace talks and legislative compromises all collapsed. There was no judicial forum large enough or powerful enough to rule on the question of secession that both sides would have respected.
The Supreme Court couldn't touch it. The only way forward was a constitutional amendment, which requires a consensus that had totally vanished.
And in Pakistan, the political process failed when the negotiations collapsed and the central military establishment just opted for force over accepting the electoral results.
So in all three cases, the formal, the lawful, the peaceful mechanisms all failed, pushing the disagreement into the realm of violence.
Which leads to the shared outcome. And it feels like universal law, doesn't it? Military confrontation, war, and the deepest possible historical damage.
Whether it was the division of the Ummah in the First Islamic Civil War,
The deadliest war in U.S. history.
or the irreversible national breakup of Pakistan, the failure to resolve constitutional disagreement lawfully led to catastrophe every single time.
So this synthesis, it delivers the definitive judicial conclusion drawn from our material, what the lawyers would call the ratio decidendi. And for you listening, that's just the core legal truth, the binding principle that governs all three cases.
And that core conclusion is this. A constitution collapses when authority is contested and political disagreements are not resolved through lawful forums. This is the universal law of political schism. It transcends culture, time, and political system.
That concept of lawful forms, that's the hinge upon which all of stability depends, isn't it? We are talking about institutions, the Supreme Court, the Electoral Commission, the Binding Council, that must possess credibility.
They have to be free from political manipulation.
And they have to be accepted a priori by every major political actor as the final word, even if you lose.
Especially if you lose. The moment a political party or a regional power decides that the lawful forum is rigged or that the cost of accepting a ruling is just too hard to bear,
The constitutional order is already dead.
it is. The subsequent fighting is simply the funeral.
And the impact of these failures, it didn't just end with the fighting. The crisis around Ali shaped centuries of Islamic political thought. It led to permanent theological and legal debates about succession, the nature of authority, the legitimacy of the use of force by the state.
It set a long-term precedent for political instability in the region.
America's Civil War, on the other hand, permanently settled the question of federal supremacy, which remains the constitutional foundation of the U.S. today.
It proved that a republic founded on high-minded ideals required blood to finalize its actual structure.
And Pakistan's 1971 crisis irrevocably redefined South Asian geopolitics, leading to the creation of a new sovereign nation. And it forever changed how legitimacy and autonomy are discussed in multi-ethnic states all over the world.
The lesson here is just so clear and, frankly, profoundly relevant for today. Constitutional design is the infrastructure of national peace. Political legitimacy has to be clear, justice has to be timely, and crucially, institutions must be trusted and binding.
Otherwise, unity is just a temporary political arrangement waiting to fall apart.
Exactly.
It is truly incredible how these three disparate historical tragedies, spanning vast swaths of human history, converge on a single, inescapable point about governance. It forces us to prioritize constitutional stability over political expediency every single time.
And the final moral lesson synthesized from the sources, I think it serves as the ultimate summary.
What is it?
A nation divided by power struggles dies slowly. A nation united by justice lives forever.
That idea, a nation united by justice, it requires those lawful forums to deliver and to be accepted, even when the outcome is politically painful for one side. So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought for exploration, something that builds on this necessity of institutional trust. Considering the outcomes of these three schisms, the arbitration failure in the Caliphate, the failed peace talks in the U.S., and the collapsed negotiations in Pakistan, what specific institutional mechanisms could be put in place today in modern nations to ensure that high-stakes electoral or justice disputes are resolved through lawful forums before powerful regional or political actors feel compelled to contest authority physically?
That is the structural challenge of lasting peace.